Welcome to the Outer Realm with Michelle DeRoche and Amelia Pisano. Airing live on the United Public Radio Network, 105.3 FM in New Orleans.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Thursday night segment of the Outer Realm. We are actually broadcasting via a pre-recorded version of the episode tonight on the United Public Radio Network, UFO Paranormal Radio Network, 105.3 from the Gulf Coast and 107.7 FM from New Orleans. We're fully sponsored by the amazing people over at Folgers Coffee, who've been a part of our journey for at least 3 or 3.5 years now. So we thank them very much. We're very, very grateful to have them as part of our Outer Realm family. Also, big thank you to Justin Snicker, aka Dr. Snick, the Sonic Surgeon, for his contribution of his music and his voice for the intro that you just heard. He's an award-winning composer of Halloween, horror, sci-fi, and dark wave electronic music, which can be found on all of your favorite music platforms. Also, big thank you to Steve McGinnis, the artist behind all of our banners and logos here at the show. He does specialize also in the horror genre, but can do phenomenal commission pieces of all types, including pets, one of my favorites, books, things of that nature. So check him out on Facebook and Instagram. So tonight, we welcome the return of our dear friend, Mark Olly, all the way from the UK. Mark is an archaeologist, an author, a musician, got his hand in everything. That's why we love him. And the topic tonight, of course, is going to be Knights Templars, which is very near and dear, to myself and to Amelia, and cannot wait to delve into this. So without further ado, here you are.
Whoa, it worked. We're here.
We're here. You made it. Love it.
Dear me.
Wow.
We've been having some internet problems, but then again, that's what technology does. So, but we're here now.
It does. It does. I think the ancients had it better than we did, technically speaking, So tonight, first off, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Happy New Year to yourself and everyone at your radio station and all the listeners as well.
Thank you.
We've made it through into 2024.
I know. I feel like I kind of slid in there by the seat of my pants.
Yeah, it's one of those things when you're a kid that you always sort of imagine the 21st century as sci-fi.
Yes.
And here we are.
Almost like Dark Ages.
Yeah. Have we gone forward or have we gone backwards? Yeah, it's a good question.
Well, if we can go back a little further, it might be okay, but that's a whole other show, isn't it? So we've touched a lot on the Knights Templar. You've had some phenomenal connections in your books and your research, and this show is going to be based on the Knights Templar, and we're going to dig deep. And I'm very excited because this is something that I've sort of researched for a long time because I have family lines in it. And it's very fascinating to me because I don't really think people realize how deep the rabbit hole actually goes. See, just the look on your face, I know there's a big rabbit hole.
Yeah, it's huge. It's like a giant bomb crater. It just goes on forever.
Right.
How
where's the best place to start?
Well, I suppose
we all fangirling.
Start at the beginning. We'll start at the beginning.
Right.
Okay, let's dive in right at the beginning. It's worth mentioning that the Templars were a product of their time. So in order to get where they're coming from, you've almost got to jump back a few hundred years before they arrive on the scene. I'll give you some examples. The Celtic Chaldees, the holy men. We've got carvings in the UK of these guys going round in threes, and they are basically Christian Druidic monks. That's what they are. They're monks.
Mhm.
And on one of these carvings, at least two of these figures are carrying swords. So the idea that warrior monks was something that suddenly appeared in the days of the Crusades, that's not the case. This particular one comes from a Roman fort near Cirencester, and it's 3rd century. So you're going back, right back into the middle of the Roman era, really. The orders of knights, the idea of, guys riding around on horseback in shiny armor and, gathering together into groups of young, fit fighters. That as well is a Roman idea. That's a Roman concept. That goes all the way back to about 700 BC, so that grew out of the Greeks. So the whole idea, the whole thing with military and sacred, etc., that kind of just rolls along through, the 400s, 500s, 600s, 700s. By the time you get to that period, you have got a lot of pilgrims going out to the Middle East. So from the 600s, it becomes an Islamic area, 700s, 800s, 900s. There are people out there like the merchants of Amalfi who start the hospital in Jerusalem who are already looking after these, pilgrims. But there is a military aspect to that as well. Now, the reason I mentioned the merchants of Amalfi is they've got this 8-spiked St. John's, Knights of St. John's type cross, which you very often see in black or white. They've got that as their symbol. Their symbol is stuck on the front of the hospital in Jerusalem around 900 AD.
Right.
So in actual fact, the first order of knights recognized by the Pope in around about 1113 AD is the Knights Hospitaller. Yes. They start the ball rolling. So, like I say, let's begin at the beginning. Right. And the reason is that loads of people got injured in the Crusade. 1096 they set off. 1099 they got to Jerusalem. Loads of people got injured. So the Hospitallers laid aside their weapons and did what people in hospitals do and treat the injured. Basically. So really you're starting off the whole sort of medieval thing, the whole idea gets going round about 1112, 1113 with the Hospitallers. You've also got to remember that there are more orders of knights knocking around Jerusalem than just Hospitallers and Templars.
Well, the Knights of Lazarus, I believe, were another one.
Yeah, they're fabulous. They wear a big green cross. So if you happen to bump into them on the battlefield, you'd sort of edge your way because they're all lepers.
There's a weapon.
So, you'd kind of shuffle, as far away from them guys as you could possibly get. But they're fantastic in war because they really don't care, if bits get knocked off or they die in war. They're really not that bothered. You've got the Knights of the Patriarch of Jerusalem. They wear the patriarchal cross, which is this double braced thing. You've got the Knights of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. That's where you get the very famous Jerusalem cross from, which is the sort of cross with the T-bars and then 4 little crosses. That represents the 5 wounds of Christ. Hence, Church of the Holy Sepulchre was where his tomb was. So that's kind of where that comes from. So you've got all these different things going on. There's all these different orders in there. Templars. I've got an interesting thought about the Templars. I kind of imagine they all used to have pubs and churches next to one another, these orders. So you can sort of imagine one day, the founders of the Templar order sort of blundering into the local medieval pub and bumping into these Hospitallers. And the Hospitallers are like, hey, you're not going to believe this. The Pope's just, he's written us a certificate of approval. So we're like, Pope approved now, this is in
a big deal, right?
It is, because you can get charitable with it. You can build more churches. You can get patrons to give you donations. So it's quite a big deal. Right. So the Bishop of Chartres, in one of his letters in 1114, mentions an order that's forming, referred to as the Order of Christ. That's this newly founded order, the Knights of Christ. People are beginning to think that was the Templars kind of working it out. But that's 1114. So that's within 12 months of the Hospitallers starting up. And then, of course, the famous start date is 1118, because that's when they actually apply to the Pope, and the Pope goes, yeah, we'll have another order. All right, bill of approval as well,
right?
rubber stamp that lot. So that's kind of that's where that starts. So you've just got these orders all building up. Really, they're all getting together between round about 1099, 1100, round about 1118. So you're looking at a period of about 20 years when all of these orders are sorting themselves out and really founding themselves and basing themselves inside Jerusalem. There you go. That's your starting introduction.
Wow. Well, that's very impressive, because I know, when we have these, 5 guys or 8 guys going to Jerusalem, the hospitalers had already been there for several years already on the scene. So not so much the first crew to arrive. But I hear they go back even considerably further.
Well,
I know.
Yeah, there's some interesting bits. That you're starting to edge towards the mysteries here.
Yes.
It's worth saying, when they first sort of get founded, the name Templars, comes from the fact that they were given Solomon's Stables, which is this big building which now has a mosque stuck in the middle of it, but it's like a huge building stuck on the side of the mount where the temple was. So it's kind of one side of the Temple Mount, and that's where they get Templars from. But as you rightly say, by the time they get founded, there's only 9 knights, and they've only got 4 horses between them, and they're supposed to be protecting pilgrims against, tens of thousands. Yeah, tens of thousands.
It's not a thing.
It's impractical.
Which leads me to think they were there for a different reason.
Well, this is where the Solomon's Stables become quite important. Yes, they're guiding people back and to from Jaffa and Acre, which are the ports, back to Jerusalem. But at the same time, they're digging this thing which still exists today, which is known as the Templar Tunnel. And as soon as they get the chance, they start tunneling. So some people credit them as the world's first archaeologists. I don't. I think there was people digging old stuff up way before that. But anyway, they specifically start tunneling. And what they do is they tunnel straight under the kind of dome of the rock and keep going. And they're clearly heading for the site, the next site up on this platform where the Holy of Holies stood.
So like a ritual chamber of sorts.
Solomon's Temple, that's where it was. Now that was destroyed about 900 years, just over 900 years before they got there, by the Romans, who some people say they accidentally burnt it down, some people say they deliberately burnt it down. But anyway, the whole tabernacle was made of timber, and it had incense burned in it for thousands of years. So the whole lot went up like a torch. And it's thought that it had a basement complex, an underground complex, where as the temple was burning, obviously the priests and what have you took everything underground and hid it, and then sort of blocked all of those tunnels up. And that's what they think the Templars were heading for. Now it gets interesting, because by 1127, which is when they got the famous Red Cross pate, and they got more recognition as well from Catholics, from the Vatican, from the Pope. At that point, it's thought that they found something. So they've been digging for a heck of a long time. There's still only 9 of them, and a few extra recruits and a few, kind of hangers on, and still not that many horses. That's where you get the 2 guys sat on one horse. It's not some weird, sexual, sort of, thing that they had to do, or ceremony or initiation. It's nothing to do with that at all. It's simply the fact that they only had 1 horse to carry 2 of them. That's it. They were just, poverty, chastity, obedience, and that was the poverty part. But they clearly found something. They definitely found something. All kinds of speculation. This is where you start really falling down the rabbit hole. Some people think the Ark of the Covenant, which is Moses, ark with the 10 commandments and the rod that budded and the bucket of manna and all that, they think that ark, think Raiders of the Lost Ark, that's possibly what was down in the basement.
Right.
There's also the possibility that all the temple treasures that the Romans didn't steal also ended up down there. So that's a huge amount of gold with a fair old wedge of silver in there. And then there's also equally the possibility that you're looking at something a bit like the Dead Sea Scrolls. So you're looking at a library of hidden information. Yeah, now I'm inclined to drift towards it being scrolls and written material. And again, you've got to remember at that point, I mean, these guys, I know they're knights. Everyone thinks they're kind of, rough, tough, burly thugs in big tin cans, but that's not what they're like. I mean, they can speak Anglo-Saxon, they can speak Latin, which is how they communicate in the Middle East, and they can speak Norman French. So they've already got 3 languages under the belt,
Right.
And they're using the Latin to communicate with people like the Sufis and the holy men of the Islamic world, who at this point can still read a lot of the documents, like the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Nag Hammadi Library, the Gospels, all that sort of stuff. They've not lost the knack of reading all these old languages. So it's a huge melting pot of information and histories, and precisely the stuff the Church, the Vatican, would want to get its hands on. So perhaps that's how they became rich.
Well, I mean, you're looking at guys like Hugh de Payen, for example. I mean, you have men of title going who already have wealth, and the Templars are known for giving up the wealth. So to me, giving up wealth to go treasure hunting doesn't make a lot of sense. However, if you're going to look for the wealth being knowledge, even sacred knowledge, even knowledge from the old mystery schools, that might be worth giving it all up for. So I tend to agree with you with respects to knowledge. I think alchemy had a big part of that. I think, because that was the thing of the times, going way back.
I think one of your biggest clues is the fact that the Templars were obsessed with bringing new things, new technology back from the Middle East. They brought mathematics, they brought architecture, they brought medicine, they brought weapons of war, social structure, different writing skills, loads of these things that ended up as pilgrimage items. It said they brought the Holy Grail to Spain. There's all sorts of stuff going on at this point where they're bringing stuff back because of the medieval obsession with things biblical and things legendary. So it's why not bring knowledge? At this point as well, you've got to remember that there's no such thing as the Bible. Yes, there are 66 books that end up, being copied and used for religious purposes. Nobody else can read them. They never get any further than the monks. If you're not monastic and you don't have the skills, it's not like little Ragnar, who's an Anglo-Saxon living on his farm. He has no idea. He just wanders into the local church. It's like this for hundreds of years as well. He just wanders into the local church and gets told, by the guys that are in there. So it's a kind of a monopoly. So if there's additional material and extra wisdom and extra knowledge and extra books and extra, stuff out there, then the church is going to want to know, because basically at this point, that's what they're doing to make money. They're buying souls out of hell and distributing information you can't get anywhere else, and creating legends, to mystify people and what have you. And that's really what they're about before the Renaissance, before everything starts to open up. So, I mean, the whole of the Crusade period, right from the late 1000s right through to the sort of mid 1300s, the whole of that period is before the Renaissance. It's all, well before.
Do you think that the technology aspect of things go back even farther? Because there are, of course, beliefs that the technology itself goes back even to Atlantean times, because you see, if you go and you look even in ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs, you will see that 8-pointed star in some places. There's a strong belief that a lot of that stuff had been moved and that there was actually more than one ark.
Yeah, that's the Star of Ishtar. That goes all the way back to Babylon, the 8-pointed star. It's a very, very early symbol indeed. I think all of that material, I'm going to be very general and broad, which we've now discovered, which we've got, I mean, there's reams and reams of books and studies and archaeology and history and TV programs, all that have been done about that material. I think it's valid. I think it is true, and that's what they were after. They were going for the stuff that nobody else had got. That's what they were trying to seek out and find. But you've also got to remember that it was only sort of 600 years since the final destruction of the library at Alexandria. at this point.
Yes.
So basically, we've got this idea that we've got everything. And the more you study archaeology and history, the more you realize that we've actually got a tiny percentage of what used to be, and that a majority of it's lost. And a lot of materials that pop up kind of prove that to be true, because you'll find, even going back into the fossil record, people are doing things that they're just not supposed to do. They're not supposed to know that,
Right.
Right. So you don't even have to go off and start looking at Lemuria and Atlantis and Mu and all of that sort of thing. You don't have to go down that road, because the stuff we know about, the stuff that you can actually go and see in museums, that's brain popping just on its own. And like you say,
for sure. But I mean, how much of the Templars come or ended up in Portugal? And there's a strong, archaeologists, etc., now exploring the fact that Atlantis was, in the Azores, just off the Azores in the water. So now you're pretty close with respect to a connection, because there's so much in Portugal about the Knights Templar. There's so much.
If you look at the way they surround the Mediterranean, that will give you the biggest clue. So anything at all that's stuck around the Mediterranean, North Africa included, all of that area, plus the East, and probably the Americas, because that's another mystery. Both ends, if you like. Right. All of that is Templar territory. And again, there's a reason for that, because the first set of Templars are, in fact, Vikings.
Yes.
That's what they are. They're Northern French Vikings and Southern French Vikings, because that's what Normans are. They're the Northmen. Right. So basically, if Eric the Red made it all the way to Greenland and made a note of it, the Templars then were aware of it.
The Viking Rollo. I mean, that's perfect.
Absolutely.
What
a guy. He's a convert or die Christian, is Rollo. It's great. You will convert or your head's coming off. That was his attitude. That was in the 10th century. And they all trace the lineage back to Rollo. So
yes.
When you start
the Sinclair line, right? And for you Da Vinci Code people out there you go. There's your connection.
There's your connections, But the trick is to look at the earlier stuff to then understand what was going on in that actual Templar period. It just feeds in like an unbroken flow. I was reading something the other day, and it just popped my head. The first Pilgrim's Guidebook to Jerusalem. It was written. Are you ready for this? It was written by an Anglo-Saxon. It was written in 600 something AD. When they first got there, when they first opened it up. They wrote a guidebook. So, and there was a couple of guidebooks before that, but they weren't quite as popular. But the number one most popular guidebook to Jerusalem is written by an Anglo-Saxon. So
see, that to me that's pretty wiggy. I mean, it's cool because even Rollo came after that.
Yeah, because you got 600s, 700s, 800s, and then Rollo's ancestors then flow into the 900s. So by the time you get to the Vikings, they've even got a guidebook. It tells you where everything is. You've got the Holy Grail's here, the Holy Sponge is here, the Crown of Thorns is here, so on and so on and so on.
Yes.
I'll tell you that story. I think when we did the King Arthur thing, I mentioned it, that they were doing some research recently. I think it was in 2012. Out in Jerusalem and the East, and they were looking through, of all things, Islamic shipping receipts. So they're all written in cursive Islamic. So you've got to sort of be out there and know what you're doing to be able to read these things. And blow me if they didn't get two of these receipts that basically say the Templars, who they refer to as Roomies, which are Northern French knights, were entrusted to take the Grail from the Church of the Holy Sepulchre on board a ship to Spain. So we've got we've got the shipping receipt sending them out with it, and we've got the other end, we've got the shipping receipt of it arriving. Now the interesting thing is there are two stone grails. There are two of them, these dishes. Chalice of Donna Aruca, I think, is one of them, and there's another one, which is a Chalice of the Disciples, possibly. Anyway, there's two of them, and it's got to be one of those two. And one of them, it's said that Saladin wanted a fragment of the cup to heal his daughter. And one of these two cups has got a piece carved out of the lip. So they think that's the one. So we've got, we know where the cup, whatever the cup was, at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, whatever was regarded as being, the cup at the Last Supper, it's sat in Spain at the moment. But it was down to the Templars. The Templars did it. They, the Roomies, the Knights, they took it over there.
And so how many other things were they, like, for example, the original Crown of Thorns, which was at Notre Dame Cathedral? We know that many of the Templars went there to pray and such before battle, or for what.
Well, you've got Templars connected to the Crown of Thorns, because I think it was one of the Templars, one of the kings that was attached to the Templar order, gave away most of the little thorns off it, so it's completely bald now. Jesus. But we know that plait is regarded as being real. You've got the classic, you've got the Turin shroud. It was the de Charny family. It was Geoffrey de Charny was burnt at the stake in 1314 as the last preceptor of the French Templar Knights. His family gives that shroud to the church at Lire. So we know for a fact that they had the shroud. They probably got it from Edessa around about 950.
Let's talk about the shroud, though. Do you think, there's a rumor that some people thought it was Jacques de Molay. Because it just didn't go fast. It just didn't seem to go back. I know. But the point, I guess, was that they didn't feel like it went back far enough. They couldn't authenticate it.
Well, with good old modern technology and archaeology, I can probably nail that one. Quite a way back, as we entered the 21st century, there was a lady came forward, a lady archaeologist who is a world expert in Roman textiles. And she looked at the microscopic photographs of the shroud, and she said, there's no problem whatsoever. That's a 1st century Roman fabric. So we know that the piece of material's right. And then they've gone further, because they've taken samples from all over it of various bits of sweat and blood and DNA and what have you. They've analysed all that. The DNA, I think, very recently came back as being, it should have been for a male. I think it should have been XY.
Right.
And it's come back as, I think it's, let's get this right, XX. Is it female? Or is it YY? No, it's XX, isn't it, for female? I can never remember which one's which. Anyway,
I can never remember it at all.
Anyway, it's come back as missing the necessary chromosome anyway. So it looks like, although it's the figure on it's male, it's got female chromosomes, which is like, whoa, that's a bit drastic. It also matches some of the inhabitants around Bethlehem who are still living there today. So everything seems to stack up. And it is still, without doubt, archaeologically, the #1 best depiction of a crucifixion victim in the world. The nails don't go through the palms, they go through the wrists, they don't go through the feet, they go through the ankles. All the damage as described in the Bible is all spot on. Medically, it's bang on. You can identify the whip he was hit with, cat o' nine tails with 3 metal balls. You can reconstruct it. The detail is just astounding. And recently they even thought they could see 2 coins placed on the eyes. So, people want to have a look at the negative image. I can see possibly 2 coins, but the kicker is they're the right size for the coins that were in circulation either side of Christ's lifetime. So everything just stacks up. If you were going to fake it, you'd really, really, really have to know what you were doing, really. So I'm currently way over there swinging in the direction of it being the real deal. Couldn't tell you how it was done. Some kind of photographic process that occurred with all the oils and the sweat and everything else. It kind of boof and took a photo somehow. Some kind of light phenomena did that. But you've got that. You've got Scottish tartan white guys with red hair that turn up in Ethiopia with this box, with the ark. That's the legend. Read Graham Hancock's Sign and the Seal, which is supposed to be an Axum in Ethiopia. It's supposed to be under the church there. But they have an ark in every church out there. That's what they follow. That's their way of doing things. But they won't deny that it was brought there by these, what appear to be Scottish Templars. And all their rock-cut churches are all in the shape of Templar crosses. And there's Templar crosses all over things. They're painted everywhere, know,
Mhm.
it's crazy. It's ridiculous. All the ark keys, these brass keys that go with the arks, have all got Templar crosses on them.
Right.
It's nuts. How you can not make that connection is beyond me.
Right. Right.
You got to be
Um,
careful though, because the Templar cross predates them as well. That goes all the way back to early Christian baptistries and burials from the 3rd and 4th century. That strange circle with the strange, you know, fanned out cross in red.
yes.
You know,
Yes.
I've seen that in museums, you know, going all the way back to the late Roman. So again, they're pinching a lot of the iconography from the past.
Mhm.
But yeah, they've got so many relics. It's just unreal.
Well, they they sure got around, that's for sure. But I mean, right down to what I find interesting is the architecture. It's believed that they were able to find, you know, the knowledge to be able to build or create buildings that could heal, that, you know, sound, resonance, vibration,
Yeah.
frequency. So you're getting into all of that again, and you can tell most of the churches or dwellings, castles, fortresses, they all had one of these rooms.
Well, there's
To
a
heal
little
the soul as well, right?
there's a little known piece of information we have over here, because where I live sort of in northern England, between
Mhm.
Manchester and Liverpool. Just below Manchester, there's an area called Derbyshire, and in Derbyshire, the Templars were quite prolific in building stuff.
Mhm.
And there's a couple of churches there where it's actually in the records where it says they brought Moorish architects back with them from the Crusades, specifically to build these religious buildings and abbeys and things like that.
Mhm.
So we know they did it. It's I hate to refer to Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, you know,
Yeah, do
Kevin
it. People
Costner and
love
all
it.
that, but you
Right.
know, he had a Moorish sidekick, you know, in that. Well, that's true. That actually is true. That would have happened. They were coming over here at the time of the Crusades.
Right. Right.
And elsewhere, potentially, and this is a hot potato, they might have made it all the way to America.
Well, we know they did. Because we know the Vikings did. We know the Vikings made it down to, you know, not just northern part, like let's say coming in off the coast of Canada and Newfoundland, but down as far as South America. Because I mean, Dr. Kathleen Ann Ball found all of that information. 200, she predated Columbus by 200 years, and there's all kinds of markings that show that. But the Vikings were there allegedly in the 800s.
Yeah. And now there's more bits of Templar stuff turning up in America to prove that they were around. And over here, I went up and visited Roslyn Chapel not too long back. They've got a window that actually has corn on the cob decorating it.
That's right.
So, you know, in the 1230s, 1240s,
Yeah,
you know, so
exactly.
that's the St. Clair's in America, you know.
Exactly.
And there's
Exactly.
enough evidence, folks can go and find it. There's tons of evidence to back up the fact that they were out there.
There's a friend of mine, Wayne Murphy, who has, you know, Mohican. He's a Mohican man, just lovely, lovely man. And they've got, the reservation has something like 30,000 acres, and they have found Templar crosses and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
So they've got 5 sites already that they have found. I'm sure some of it predates. It's probably post Ice Age, you know, but it's much, much older. You know, it's trying to realize you have people who are moving in, but they're not going to be able to. It's just very few people build monolithic, you know, structures. But they would have thought, though, you know.
There's an interesting book. I might have mentioned it before, but if not, it was released in the 1970s, and it's just called America BC, and it's by a guy called Barry Fell. You'll have to get it secondhand on Amazon or whatever, because you won't get a new copy of it. It's been out of print for years, but it was released in the 1970s, and it was banned almost immediately because it literally goes through blow by blow all the stuff that you find in the States. So there's Irish, Phoenician, Roman, Egyptian, prehistoric, Viking, Templar, medieval, you name it. It's all out there. There's tons of it. But obviously the people in the know just didn't want you to know, you know.
Right.
It was one of those.
It's true. I mean, they've just found evidence of Egyptians being in the Grand Canyon, and they've all of a sudden closed that section off. No, not for you regular people. But
Yeah.
it's there. You go to Sedona in Arizona, and there are many structures there that look like Egyptian not so much buildings. I mean, not even so much a pyramid, but statues, likenesses. It's just sort of like, okay, so we're definitely the technology. I think, these people, these cultures being able to travel was no doubt it existed. I mean, China was doing it like way, 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 way back.
Well, they had a huge navy in the 1400s, didn't they?
Yes.
The Chinese, with these enormous boats that are the size of ocean-going liners. I think it was one of the Chinese emperors actually sent them off to the west to try and do some trading with us lot. I don't know how successful that was.
They sent out 300 ships at one point. What was that, in the 1600s? It was something crazy.
Yeah, there's a book about that. I think the book's called 1492, if I remember right, and that was the year that they were all sent out. So the idea that everything was static is nonsense, because if you had a river or a bit of ocean, or something you could sail on anywhere around about, going across lakes and things like that, people were just all over the place. There were trade routes. The land routes were risky, but
well, you had the land bridge at one time, right?
And the ocean routes were quite safe, apart from the odd pirate, but there you go. So people were, they're zipping all over the place for thousands of years. And the Templars were no exception. They had this enormous navy, which it always tickles me up. Friday the 13th of October, 1307. Philip of France, instructs that all the Templars on all of his lands be arrested.
Oh, Philip.
But then somebody on Thursday the 12th had actually tipped them all off, and they witnessed this enormous navy, because they had the biggest navy in the world at that point. This enormous navy sails out of France, and by the time Philip arrives, by the time they arrives at most of these preceptories, it's 2 men and a dog, and everything's gone. Where that navy went, nobody knows. But it is reported that they sailed off on black flags with a white cross, and what they did was stuck a skull over it.
That's right.
Because there you go, first outlawed, pirate, illegal, navy of no particular country. And off they went. And that's where you get this speculation about, maybe they got to Scotland, maybe they got to America, maybe they went to parts of Europe, down to North Africa. Nobody knows. I think
all of the above.
Yeah, I do. If it was me,
you don't put all your eggs in one basket, right? Everybody just sort of.
Yeah, they just, stuck with the mates and just floated off in small flotillas. I'm pretty sure that they got to Scotland, though, because they had this thing. When all of a sudden Templars became illegal, they didn't just vanish. There were 3 King Edwards in this country, and all 3 of them really liked the Templars. Right. So the Templars over here never got dissolved till 1337.
Scotland was the same. They fought alongside the Scottish, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, it's said they fought at Bannockburn, and there's at least 3 accounts in churches that say that these warriors in black and white came to, support the Scots. Well, that's the only reason I can see for 60,000 English knights and a king packing up and going home. Right. If you got this black and white army coming at you, basically you've got the SAS, you've got the best fighters the world has ever seen. Well, that's good reason to leave the field, and go home.
Right.
And now we've got the evidence. It was Masonic researchers that have found these documents, medieval documents, in various Scottish churches that depict the knights in black and white. And as I said, there's at least 3 of those now. So it's pretty certain. It's fairly certain that's...
Well, they moved along. I mean, look at the Battle of Acre. I mean, that's... We know that they moved around. We know that after this happened, they took off. We also know that a lot of them went back... Well, I say went back to Portugal. There's so much, Freddie Silva spent 20 years researching that and found stuff down in Portugal, basically. And we know people go there. The evidence is there. I mean, let's face it, the church went down there. The Inquisition was for a reason, because they went down and then regrouped renamed.
Yeah,
So
rebranded. That's what you're looking for. Yeah.
rebranded.
Because they didn't just vanish. I mean, in Scotland, it's great.
Right.
If you go to the clan burial grounds, you've got
Right.
all these burials which are clearly Templar, and they start,
Yeah.
somewhere in the 1100s and the 1200s and the 1300s. But then they don't stop. They just carry on 1400s, 1500s, 1600s, 1700s. You can see a continuous unbroken flow of the same iconography and the same type of burials. The reason for that is that Wales, Ireland and Scotland were out of the Catholic Church's reach.
Right.
So, you can tell them to get out of England, but you can't tell them to get out of those other bits. And basically that happened the world over. They scattered it into other countries where the Catholic Church, it was beyond the Catholic Church's reach.
Right.
Some of my favorites are things like, you look at the Swiss flag and it's white with a red Templar cross in the middle, and everyone's like, oh, I wonder where the money went. Where did all the Templar treasure go? And it's like, well, Swiss banking.
Why not? I was going to say,
yeah. Why not? I mean, the Templars invented the traveller's check. That's how they got rich over 300 years, as well as people leaving money to them.
Right.
So much for the poverty bit. The chastity bit slipped a bit as well, and the obedience definitely. As they got towards the end, the medieval saying was to drink like a Templar, because eventually Saladin threw them out of the Holy Land, and they were out of a job at that point. They'd become fairly lazy and fairly useless towards the end, which is a shame, they sort of wandered off. When they rebranded, they went off. I can tell you how they survived as well. There's at least 3 branches of surviving knights. You've got your Masonics. Your Masonic Templars are said to have their roots with Templars that fled to places like Wales, Ireland and Scotland in particular. And it's said that that's how they got drawn into the Masonic guild, if you like, as a thing in medieval times. Yeah, maybe not. That's a bit blurry round the edges, shall we say. But you've still got them. They're still there in the degrees, Masonic English Rite. And then you've got basically Catholic Templars. Now, the Catholics in 1380 absolved the Templars of all wrongdoing. They actually had their own church hearing, and the Pope just said, look, we can't find anything wrong with you, and it wasn't really the church that completely destroyed them. It was the various kings and rulers that were, after the politics and money.
Right.
Yeah, bags of money. That's what they were after. But the Catholic Church actually really rather liked them. So when they started rebranding, which they did, a lot of the orders then just got pulled back into the church as holy orders of knights, warrior monks. And then the third category are mercenaries. They scattered right across the planet and formed other things. So in this country, you had the Order of the Garter, the Order of the Round Table. You've got the Order of the Fleur de Lis that formed on the continent, and then they joined other orders like the Teutonics, like the Hospitallers, etc. So they never actually vanished. They never went away. And when people are looking at Templar mysteries, again, right at the very end, you've got to go back in the 1300s and have a look what the Hospitallers ended up with, because that's where most of the Templar stuff finished up. Anything that the Templars didn't want, seized, they just gave to the Hospitallers, and that was that. So, 300 or 400 years later, the French crown had still not been paid a penny.
Funny that, yeah.
Never got it.
No, but you know what? They got land.
Yes, they did. They got the 2/3 of France back that was owned by the Templars. Southern France, in particular, as is very well known. That was an awful lot of Templar land down there.
Well, there wasn't a lot of Templar massacre. If you look at Carcassonne with the Cathars, and you had like 20,000 people killed at that point. That's not cool.
Southern France is an interesting place, though, because by the time you got
to
the well, I have as well. By the time you get to the later Crusades, a lot of the male knights have died, and of course the ladies then have inherited, the belongings of their nobles. Yes. So not too long ago, somebody did a study of the surviving records, because there's quite a few preceptory records that have survived in southern France. By the time it gets to the end, female knights are outnumbering male knights 2 to 1.
Wow.
So there's a lot of female knights down there, which is unusual, but it's not unusual for southern France, but it's unusual for orders of knights. And again, they're building on previous history. Back in the 800s, 900s, there's actually an Anglo-Saxon manual of warfare for female knights, which is
but there would
really
be, because you had female Viking warriors that not as good as the men.
Exactly. Right. They just carry the same thing on. It's like when the men are off, raping and pillaging and founding kingdoms, they'd hand the keys. Their bunch of keys would go to the partner, to the wife, and she would literally become that particular noble man. She would replace him in the social structure. So she had the keys to all the treasure chests. She owned all the buildings, all the land, the livestock, and they just carried on. They carried on doing that, into medieval times.
Right.
Even the idea of the sacred sword, everyone's like, oh, well, back in the Bronze Age and Iron Age, they were throwing swords into pools as offerings, But then don't forget, get into the 400s, 500s, get the Arthurian period. Oh, look, they're doing the same thing. They're throwing swords into lakes. That didn't stop till you get to like the 1200s, the 1300s. They're still throwing swords into lakes and into water as late as that. So that doesn't fizzle out pretty much till after the Crusades, till the days of the Renaissance.
Do there's a lot of history sitting in the water?
All over Europe. If you know where to look, yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. So essentially, you have everybody rebranding.
Yes, you do.
And they're still building. I mean, again, I go back, Portugal, France. It's still continuing. Yeah. And then they branch out to the New World, but there's not a whole lot. Like, it makes me wonder how many actually made it. It's because it's hard to. I mean, it's trying to, escape the church, so to speak, is the big one. But how many of them actually made it? Because it almost seems like it's harsher. It's harsher. It wasn't as, I hate to say it wasn't as civilized, because I find most indigenous people are more civilized than a lot of the people who made it to the New World. So that I don't mean it in that respect, but I mean it in respects of the amount of places where you could settle. It's not like you could move into a house per se. Or an abode, and survive a harsh winter without the help or the assistance of the Native American people or Canadian people, North American people.
You do have tales out there of when the Pilgrim Fathers arrived, the early settlers arrived in America. At least one set of them came face to face with what they perceived to be a Native American tribe, except they were all white. These guys were white guys. And the biggest mystery of the lot, and in fact, there's two of these, the biggest mystery is the Pilgrim Fathers discovered they could actually communicate with them. They had a tremendous amount of language in common. So they were actually talking to each other. Well, that kind of says what you're saying. They were definitely not the first to get there, and they weren't the first to learn how to survive there. And then there's an interesting thing, which again is hidden history. There's a friend of mine that works in the Library of Aberystwyth in Wales, National Library of Wales, and he came across a couple of tracts. Now, tracts are printed parchment documents that were done in limited numbers back in the early days of printing. And these go back to around about the 1620s to 1630s. Anyway, he found a number of these that had been printed, all the same tract. And in the tract, it tells the story of how during the time of the Pilgrim Fathers, in the 1620s, they sent a boat over to America, and the boat arrived in America, and the Native Americans that they encountered settled them in a valley, and then got in the boat and sailed back to Wales. So they did a tribe exchange. They exchanged a Welsh tribe from the valleys of Britain, of the UK, with a Native American tribe that was out there in the valleys of America. And one tribe went to America and the other tribe got in the ship and came back.
It's like an exchange program. I love it.
And even better than that, some of the DNA analysis that have been done in recent times have picked up Native American DNA in the population of Wales. So there's no doubt about it that they did it. So
they all came in and just intermingled and became, integrated into the communities.
Believe me, if you can survive in one of the valleys in Wales, you can survive in America, no problem at all. we have some pretty extreme weather over here, and it's usually freezing cold. So it must have been like landing in paradise when they got over there, So again, this idea of an insular, everything being trapped, within a particular culture or continent or whatever, that's not how it worked at all.
They made their way around.
Yeah, people were back and two across the Atlantic, like you wouldn't believe.
Well, I mean, I know that, one of I think it was my great grandparent made it over, could even be great. But he came in from Portugal. Yeah. And again, they're, part of the knighthood, so to speak, and made it in. And he settled into a tribe of Iroquois. It was an Oka tribe. Now, people don't realize is that the Iroquois were considered to be direct descendants, only out of many of them, but they were for sure to be direct descendants of Atlanteans, which the Templars would have known.
Well, yeah. And if something did happen and something did go down in the Atlantic seaboard region, those people would have scattered. And I think in ancient times, I think that was accepted. It was interesting because the Romans, for example, assumed that the inhabitants of the British Isles were descended from the Greeks.
Yes.
The same as the Romans were.
Right.
So, that the whole idea of, hey, we're having a Roman invasion, Britain's being invaded by the Romans, that whole idea might just be complete nonsense. Because the Romans might have just been like, well, come on, we're all the same family. We're just coming back. Now, if that can happen with the Greeks, because the Greeks are thought to be one of those scattered Atlantean societies, advanced civilizations, hence Plato's Atlantis, etc., etc.
Exactly.
They are ultimately the origin of that. Some people even think the British Isles could be Atlantis because we've got the Irish Sea in the middle with an island in the middle of that, and then island of the British Isles around that, and then sea again.
But even that was supposed to be like one island out of many different Atlantean settlements that had broken down. We had someone on the show, Michael Laflemme, last week, and wrote a book on the visions of Atlantis, probably one of the most well-researched books that I've read. And I found it extremely fascinating because he shows through the research where there's a lot of let's say, petroglyphs and structures that show when you start connecting the dots that it was really, they were everywhere.
I think if
archaeologists found one island.
Yeah, if archaeologists are being honest, then from my point of view, I don't know how they haven't spotted that sooner. You got pyramids everywhere. You got guys with elongated skulls everywhere.
Right.
You've got the same kind of language formula scattered everywhere. You've got metal that's in Egypt turning up in Britain and Germany, and metal from Britain and Germany turning up in Egypt, and you've got stuff scattered everywhere. The common burial practices, common cultural structures, common housing. It the more you start, the further back you go, the more simple it gets, and the easier it is to start matching all these things up. And then you've got all of this land that's dropped below the sea.
We know two continents at least,
there's tons of it. So, if a meteorite smacks into the planet and wipes the dinosaurs out, why couldn't the same meteorite scatter the land and cause parts of it to drop for us to lose a super civilization?
There's an ice age, every 12,000 years or something like that?
Well, you've got that as well. By the time you start looking at the gaps in the ice ages and the weight of the ice, and you look at what's going on there, and the fact that, the Gulf of Mexico is a meteorite crater, and then you start looking at the fact there's a 1/4 times the size of that under Antarctica, you start to think, okay, this is not the nice, peaceful, stable, set little box we live in. It's just not that at all. It absolutely is not that. We live in a dynamic planet that's part of a universe that, when it
Mhm.
coughs, everything changes. It's that kind of logic. So
Right.
coming back down to earth again, I'm pretty sure the Templars were aware of that. They were aware of what had gone on in their immediate past, because
Oh,
their
yeah.
immediate past would be, the 1,000 years back to Roman and Greek. They
Yes.
had more available to them. If they could get hold of material from the Library at Alexandria, from the Temple at Jerusalem, from Pyramid period Egypt, all those materials that had survived. North Africa, that's full of it. All, goodness only knows what's in the miles and miles of Vatican Library. That's probably half of that's come through the Templars. When they can get hold of all of that information, then they're sitting on a gold mine. They're rebuilding society in a way that we'd be proud of today if we could do it. I think the problem with the Templars is, though, it all went secret. Everything went underground, and they just became too rich, too powerful. At the
Do you
end.
think it's because of the church? Because the church, I mean, let's face it, that's exactly what you see now. So
Well,
if they were one of,
you could ask the question. You could almost ask the question, which church? By the time they'd finished, there was absolutely no resemblance whatsoever with the Templars and what was essentially medieval Catholicism. Because I'm going to be specific.
Yes.
The medieval Catholicism was just not what the Templars were doing. The Templars were closer to Middle Eastern Gnostics, and Sufis and holy men. That's what they were.
They were. It's believed that they were complete Gnostics, and that knowledge came from, Atlantis.
And they weren't the slightest bit interested in, tarting around Rome wearing shiny stuff,
No.
And it's interesting that as soon as the Templars vanish off the scene, within 100 years of that, you've got the seeds of the Renaissance. So the church, the medieval Catholic Church, it's about to collapse. So by getting rid of the Templars, they almost knocked away their own foundation stones. The direction humanity and theology and knowledge and the direction everything was going in, they were doomed anyway, and they didn't realize it. The Templars were the future. And I think that's why we're still fascinated by them now, because they did so much in so many different areas to give us the world that we're living in now.
I feel that, again, there's just so much more that you'll never know, obviously. But I am a bit of a Gnostic at heart. So
I definitely am. I've come out and said there's no doubt about it.
Yeah.
I am a Christian Gnostic. That's basically what I am.
Yes. Because they had it right. They followed the stars, much like many ancient cultures, but they had a really great understanding of the technology, and that got carried through. So somewhere along the line, that got hidden.
Kind of. Yeah, kind of. I think certain technologies were clearly appropriated by the Templars. There's no doubt. Go and have a look at Chartres Cathedral. There's bits of stone flying in all directions. You know what I mean? It's bonkers. I've not seen anything else that's quite as bonkers as that. There are hints of that in Roslin Chapel over here, where they've gone for this high Gothic.
Roslin Chapel is extraordinary.
But the high Gothic, and the architecture and the rules they were obeying there and what they were doing with that was just completely off the Richter scale. And that's the level that they were at. Now, I know the rest of the medieval world was nowhere near, caught up with them. You still find that today, though. It's interesting because where I've gone around the world, I've visited South America, visited North Africa, I've visited various parts of the continents and the Middle East and different areas, Egypt. Wherever you go, you realize that people are all at different historic levels. So for example, if you go to Marrakesh is pretty close to where people were in about 1100, 1200. They've not sort of advanced, if you like, past that medieval economy and medieval structure. It's not bad. They have got civilization. They do exist in the modern world, but you can see how different cultures and different areas are catching up. And it must have been exactly the same for the Templars. You know, I mean, they had a hell of a shock. There's a great story. I've got to tell you this. This really sums up the whole technology thing, really. And it's fab because not a lot of people will know this story. It's a story told by the medieval bards. Now, Richard the Lion, I mean, there were quite a lot of people who are members of the Templars. Robin Hood was, Richard the Lionheart was, quite a lot of nobles, you know, King Henry was, all sorts of people were members. But Richard the Lionheart in particular, Third Crusade, goes out to the Middle East. And I believe this story is fictional. So, you know, don't shoot the messenger with this one. But it's said that he came face to face with Saladin when he first got out there. So you can imagine Richard the Lionheart, you know, shiny metal armor, big red cross, you know, massive double-handed broadsword. And apparently he walked up to the wooden platform that contained the throne that, you know, Saladin was sat on. And he gets this double-handed broadsword and he just goes bang and sticks it into the front of this platform. And he says to Saladin, he says, "We are here to conquer this land for Christ by the might and power of, you know, European military strength." So basically Saladin then is a bit kind of, oh, didn't expect that. So
he's a very educated man as well.
Well, he just sat there, and what he did apparently was he drew out his sword and just held his sword, which of course would have been a Damascus steel scimitar, just held it, and one of his servants walked up with a silk handkerchief and dropped the silk handkerchief onto the sword, and the handkerchief just went boof and cut into two pieces like that. And apparently from that moment on, Richard the Lionheart and Saladin were extremely good friends. Right. Now, whether or not they actually did come face to face is open to question, but that was a story told by the medieval bards about how they met. And it's a very clear indication of just how far ahead of us at that point Islamic technology was. You know, they could produce a sword that could cut a silk scarf in half without needing to move the sword. You know, gravity alone was enough to cut the scarf in half. So that kind of taught, you know, in a sense, taught Richard a lesson right at the beginning. Now, Richard's a bit of a star. I mean, I love Richard to bits because he went all the way out there, crusaded, fought, got all the way to Jerusalem, and he's there outside the Damascus gate looking at the walls of Jerusalem, and he says, "I'm a warrior, I'm drenched in blood, I cannot enter the holy city." And he never went in. He never entered the city. What he did was he sent gifts, including the sword of King Arthur, with another knight who hadn't seen combat, to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And what a guy! You know, he spends all that time, you know, he's a king, he's a Templar, he's powerful, he's rich, he's everything. But he knows when he's beaten by the power of God, and he stops. He stops at the wall. And I'm like, there's somebody, and that is a true story. Right. That's somebody who really does know, you know, where it's at. Again, I suppose politically, if he had have entered the site, it would have caused a lot of problems. He knew where he stood, you know. But nevertheless, wow, you know, it's little stories like that that pop up. And you think, you know, these Templar guys were so switched on. You know, they were anything but, you know, thick, burly knights. You know, they were. Some of them were super intelligent guys. They really were.
Yes, yes. But I mean, if you're looking at the technology from the East, I mean, that goes way back. I mean, Templars went, you know, to the East to learn. There were many before, you know, the Templars as we know them. You know, it was believed that Christ himself went to the East to learn.
Well, Christ was between the age of 3 and 12 when he fled Herod's persecution so that would be from 3 BC through to 9 AD. He would have been in Egypt. And it amazed me when I went to Egypt because the original Egyptians are the Copts, the Coptic church, founded by St. Mark, which is, hey, you know, I got in everywhere because my first name's Mark, you know, no problems with that. So I really gelled with them. But I spent ages and ages talking to them. That's where the original shape for the Templar cross is found everywhere. And it's Coptic. It's out there from 2nd and 3rd century. But they actually know where the Holy Family went, where they stayed. You know, they've got their own little sort of booklet, if you like. It's like a mini Bible that tells you where they went and what they did and who they spoke to and all the rest of it. You know, there's even a church near the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Cairo. There's a little church there, and the basement is one of these stables that the Holy Family stayed in. So, you know, they know exactly where all of this took place. But then we don't, because nobody's told us, you know.
Because that information has been kept from us.
Well, I can feel a book coming on, okay, you know. Working title so far is Keys to the Temple.
There
So
we
I'm
go.
hoping to let that beast on the world at some point, maybe next year or the year after.
That would be nice.
You know,
that would be nice.
I've just got a shed load of this information in the library, you know, so it needs writing up. So
Well, somebody's got to share it. Dang it! Honestly,
you know, it's coming. It's definitely coming. But like you say, people have been going out to the Middle East to be taught things forever. I mean, you go back to the days of Constantine the Great, you know, the first sort of Christianized Roman emperor. You know, his mother, Helena, goes out there looking for fragments of the true cross and, you know, the nails of the crucifixion and the robe and et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
But when she gets there, she discovers that the whole place is already set up for pilgrims. You know, this is kind of early 300s AD. You know, so early 4th century. So they've already started to sort the place out and get ready for people to come as pilgrims. So every sort of 100-year period, yes, it's a bit different, you know, each time they rebuild and move stuff around and, you know, they come up with different things for people to see. But essentially, that's what's happening. There's pilgrims going out there all the time. So by the time you reach, you know, the Crusades, you've had 700, 800 years. You've had little Anglo-Saxons writing guidebooks, you know, and all sorts of stuff. Loads of stuff has gone on. So I was going to say the Templars knew what they were doing and what they were looking for.
Well, for sure. I mean, by the time, if you think about it, like when the Holy Family, a lot of this stuff goes back to the Gnostics, because then stemmed from them were the Essenes, and they were said to be Essenes, essentially. And from the Essenes, you had the Cathars, blah, 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 right? All the way.
That's an interesting period, because I've started going back and reading some of the newly discovered stuff.
Right.
So things like, you know, Gospel of Judas, Nag Hammadi Library, Dead Sea Scrolls, all that sort of stuff. I've gone back and I've started studying it. And it's become very quickly apparent that all of that stuff, vast majority of that stuff, was written sort of in the first, if you like, 3/4 of the 1st century. So let's say from 0 up to about 70, 75 AD. That's when they're composing most of that. So you look at that and you think, okay, in that period, you've also got all the biblical stuff, a lot of the Bible Apocrypha, you know, tons of Roman stuff, Josephus, all this, that, and the other. It's all collected around those first, up to the temple being destroyed in 70 AD.
Right.
But, and this is where it starts getting interesting, but most of that material relates to the temple. And at this point, there are no Jews. They don't exist. Nobody's invented Jews yet. They don't exist. So at that point, whoever it is that's running the temple, who are at this point Hebrews, are responsible for the production of everything I've just described, all of it. And then there aren't any Christians either, because they still haven't been invented. They don't appear till the 2nd century, till John's died and everyone's gone off and evangelized, and you know what I mean? So all the material we're handling, we've got to some extent completely the wrong idea. And the idea as well that somehow it's related directly to Qumran and the Dead Sea, you know, the Dead Sea Scrolls relate to the Essenes there. That isn't true either, because all the other archaeological finds that are coming out of the caves have got nothing whatsoever to do with the Essenes.
Crazy.
Yeah, you've got wine ewers, you've got ladies' makeup containers and mirrors, you've got knitting, you've got, honestly, it's bonkers. You've got all this, you've got a container of anointing oil, you've got all these possessions, if you like, that look like day-to-day possessions, you know, from Jerusalem, but they don't.
We know they existed.
And we don't know we don't know what the Essenes had. We're assuming that the Essenes were so strict that they wouldn't have had any of those things, you know. So the two don't. They just, when you start looking at the
that's so crazy to me.
I mean, there's a wheel cut glass dish. It's an incredible thing that came out of one of the Scrolls caves, and it's Roman, and it's all cut glass, and it's clear. It shines like crystal. What on earth are the Essenes doing with that? You know, and again, you've got the copper scroll. That's a treasure map. It tells you where all the treasure that the Romans were trying to get from the temple, where it was all buried in Jerusalem. It gives you all these different locations. Now, some people have argued maybe it's fake, or maybe it's real and we've just lost all the sites, which I think that's what's happened. But that's not something that would interest the Essenes. They're not interested in that. So when you start looking, it's this great conspiracy of convenience. It's like, the Catholics controlled the Dead Sea Scrolls for so long that by the time that the information actually came out, it was, done and dusted. Yeah, it belonged to the Essenes. It was an Essene library and this, that, and the other. No, there's a good chance it isn't. There's a good chance it's actually proto-Jewish and nothing even to do with the Christians. There's only a few little snippets in there that look like the beginnings of Christianity.
Right.
It's Hebrew. Most of it's Hebrew. It's Jewish in origin. Hence things like the Shrine of the Book. They're hugely interested in keeping the documents there because it's their heritage. It's their
heritage. Yeah. Well, let's face it, the church doesn't want anybody to know about the Essenes because they were the Holy Family. And it would show that things went on after.
I'm going to stick my colours to the mast. I'm going to nail my colours to the mast, okay. Yes, I know all about the Gospel of Mary saying, Jesus had some weird and wacky relationship with Mary Magdalene, but nobody actually knows for sure. The page that word was taken from is damaged. So nobody actually knows whether or not they kissed for sure, and nobody knows what the kiss meant because that, honestly, the Gospel of Mary is in tatters. The original translation of that is all over the place. There's a couple of pages, but most of it's in tatters. So if you take that out, you've got the Old Testament thing where, Jesus fulfills all of the law. That's it. Boom. That's his purpose, is to fulfill all of the law. Well, if he's born to a virgin, then legally he's married to the virgin. Boom. Period. Deuteronomy. That's it. So he's not going to marry anybody else. He's not going to have any children. He's not going to have any children with his own mum because that's something else. That's not law. That's something else. The legal obligations of somebody to look after, somebody else is all there in the gospel. Joseph vanishes. Jesus is always with Mary.
Let's just say there's a lot of loopholes in there.
Well, again, there's another thing as well. If you jump outside the Bible, well, the goddess always marries the god. So if he ticks every box in the first century, then technically he needs to tick that one as well. But if he's got no kids, if there are no children or nothing, then what the hell's going on? Well,
how do you know there aren't?
Well, there weren't because he didn't produce any. 23% of Jerusalem at the time he was alive had the name Issuer. And that's why we call him Jesus, because his real name's Joshua. So the idea that somebody that looked like him, possibly even one of his adopted brothers, from Joseph and that, whose name was Issuer, could have gone off to anywhere, could have gone off to India, could have gone off to, North Africa. Of course, they spread the gospel. They got scattered everywhere. But 23% of Jerusalem have got the same name. The only way you could tell who was who is because it would be such and such a person, it'd be Issuer bar somebody. So it's like Issuer bar Joseph, it's
so you're
Joseph
saying it was just bad record keeping.
Well, that's just, the amount of confusion and all the rest of it. So, sadly, there is no bloodline. So that was the sticking me colours to the mast. That pretty much nails that, collapses that. And I don't think Jesus got out of Jerusalem. I think he was buried, in the Edicule, which is the tomb of the Holy Sepulchre in Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. That's where he was buried. The archaeology and history backs that up, so clearly that's where the body was, wrapped in the Turin shroud, with the mandelion, the cloth over the front and all that. We've got all of that, and it's been there for hundreds of years, if not thousands of years. We've got that history. And then you get, all these people coming along and like, Templars are on Oak Island, Templars had the Ark of the Covenant and did this with it. And, all these different theories and different ideas, they write entire books about them. Jesus is buried under Mount Caradu in southern France, they come out with all this. So you get this huge amount of books. And yet, and this has always been my complaint, and yet at the end of the day, nobody's done that with the Hospitallers. For goodness sake, they've never changed. They've never gone away. We've got all of their records, all of the stuff the Templars gave them, all of their mysteries. They're every bit as odd as the Templars. But I think the reason why people go Templar bashing and write all these silly books is because they assume the Templars don't exist. So they're on safe ground. There's no one to complain. But the Hospitallers clearly do. They still survive. And up to her death, the Queen was their patron. So they were quite a serious order. They still are. I'm not sure who's the patron now. It's probably Charlie, King Charles. But at the end of the day, they are still going. So you can't take pot shots at them without getting some kind of a, fairly sizable kickback. But yeah, you can write anything you like about the Templars at the end of the day. That's been the problem. I mean, right. I'll give you another idea. The idea that Mary's the Grail, he had a child by Mary Magdalene and her womb is the Grail, that is only about 60 or 70 years old. That idea only sort of appeared for the first time in the 1960s, 1970s. It's a very, very new legend. It does annoy me when people bolt stuff like that on, because
you learn as you go along, right? New information. Like playing devil's advocate, pardon the pun, yeah. but
yeah, your horns are showing,
right? Like while we're on the topic, yeah. But playing devil's advocate, I mean, information does surface at some point. I mean, nothing stays buried forever. We're finding things all the time. With technology, and we're just finding information. Well, the Earth is giving up her secrets. You have people who are, with the wonders of the internet, people are communicating more. You're able to be incognito and whistleblow, for example.
Well, and again, there was that TV program as well where you had those two guys going around finding Templar treasures all over the place. And there's archaeology going on all over the world. I mean, I could spend all night talking about, where these things are happening. They're digging up entire Templar castles. They're looking at sites where the Templars fought and were massacred, and they're going through Islamic records. Goodness only knows what else is going to come out when they start translating some of the Islamic stuff, because most of their libraries are still intact. And some of them go back 2,000 years plus, especially the ones in North Africa. So boy, is there some stuff to come out. If we don't blow ourselves up, or all go to the dogs by New World Order or atomic bomb, as long as we make it through the next 100 years, there's some great stuff, some phenomenal stuff coming up.
Look at the library in Tibet. Like, it's never been looked at because nobody can really translate it all. It's ancient. Look at the library that they found in Romania. Like, there's stuff. There is information there, and it is starting to surface. But we just need to make sure somebody can read it.
Well, that was the annoying thing of when I did the King Arthur book. Everything's written in archaic medieval Welsh. Yes. There's 3 people in the country that can translate it. And they're working flat out. So you've got the same problem with a lot of this other material. Again, people who accuse the Vatican of holding back. I read the other day that their basement, there's 30 miles of basement, and it doesn't look like it did in the Da Vinci Code. You've not got all these nice, glass cases and what have
boxes, and
it's just miles of shelves.
Controlled. Yeah.
No, it's just miles and miles of shelves. And so if you can imagine that for like 2,000 years, people have been chucking stuff in there.
Yes.
It just, honestly, it would take 100 scholars 100 years just to get on top of that. Occasionally, every now and again, the Vatican do have a surprise, like that document in the 1380s that absolved the Templars. That somebody was just studying something to do with the popes, nothing to do with the Templars. And then they suddenly found this court case, this record of them, their absolution, and that just popped out of nowhere. If you've got about £4,000 spare, you can get a facsimile copy of it. But it was just one of those discoveries that just came out of nowhere. So I'm sure there's plenty of those still to come. There's a lot of them out there still to come.
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, I look at it as, yes, they hide things. Don't they all hide things? The common man doesn't need to be aware of everything. The idea of organized religion is for that reason. Organized, keeping control over the masses. People don't run amok, But with that being said, it's also, they provide a place where things can be in one place and not be destroyed. The fact that things still exist. And some of this stuff, you can't even insure it. Well, you can't put a price on it. And I know, my friend Hamilton White, who owns the Tamar Hoard, the show you were just talking about, where they're
Yeah, yeah.
finding things. He said you can't. It's very difficult to even try to insure something like that because you can't put a value on it. Nothing like that has ever been found, and that's one collection. But the
Yeah.
collection is much larger than what you see on television. There's like
Yeah,
probably
yeah.
125 pieces to it,
Yeah.
and it took 10 years
Well,
to
I've
to
got a
master.
collection here. There's quite a few bits here, and I
See,
can't get insurance on any of them.
that's what I mean.
And
Because
and
how do you?
well, and again, what they did in medieval times was if they knew where something was. I mean, the famous one I always quote is they knew where Mount Sinai was. And it
Right.
says in the Bible it's in Arabia, so it's over in Arabia. It's
Right.
not where it is on the map. And what they
Right.
did was they realized that would be a problem. If you get tens of thousands of people all thundering over to the real one, it's not going to last 2 minutes. So
No.
they just created another one, and that's where everybody goes,
Right. Right.
But that happened a lot, and it wasn't just them trying to hide the truth, because they'd tell you what it was. They'd tell you where they got the information from, and
Mhm.
they'd just put it somewhere else for safekeeping, and
Yeah.
they'd just move the focus away. If I had £1 for every time as an archaeologist I'm digging up a new site that isn't where it's supposed to be, and somebody will say, "Oh, it's up there," and it's not, because I'm on top of it. It's kind of
Right.
that happens all the time. Stuff
Right.
gets moved so that people don't know where to go poking around to do damage.
Mhm.
So there's that archaeologist historian side of me that says some things are better left kind of unlocated is the word
Well,
I'd use.
I agree with you, but I mean, if you think about it this way, look at the museums, how much they have hidden. They probably
Yeah.
have better stuff hidden than what you actually are able or allowed to see.
British Museum only put 10%. So
Wow.
90% of what they've got in storage. Even the museum here in Warrington, they've got something like 18% of their stuff's out.
Wow.
So 82% of theirs is in storage, and that's what you find.
Mhm.
That's where research comes in. Actually, that's kind of what the likes of you and me do. If you research and you find where something is, if you
Mhm.
go to somebody and you say, "I know you've got this," very often they'll go, "That's really clever of you. Yes, we have. Come and have a look. Just
Right.
don't tell anybody else."
Right.
And
Yeah.
that can happen a lot.
Right. Right.
That's how people write books, I guess. People
Right.
go and find stuff that people know is out there, and then
Mhm.
once you've got enough information, they'll confess.
Mhm.
Once you can prove that what you're looking at is what you think it is, then very
Mhm.
often they will say, "Well, actually, you're right. That's what it is." And
Mhm.
I have been asked many times in my archaeological career not to give things away in terms of location. Over here, the biggest threat is metal detecting. Once
Right.
you get a tribe of them going across the site, they'll just pepper it with holes, and
Mhm.
stuff gets removed. And in the past, you didn't always get to know what it was.
Right.
I'm glad to say that's dying down now, and they're getting a bit more official and more responsible with it now.
Right.
But it's things like that. I mean, 1,000 years ago, they were still hiding stuff, for the same reason.
Right. Right. Yeah, well, I could see you want to preserve the history in the same respect, though there's just so much that's underground or underwater, that could, like, technically change history as we know it as well. That's what I mean. I think a lot of things surface. Like we get back to the whole, Mary Magdalene and Jesus saying,
Mhm.
like, this is like a 70-year-old concept or idea. I think there's a lot of things like that are starting to surface and it makes us question, everything that's been that we've known, because even the Bible itself has been misinterpreted.
Yeah, you've
Like
got
people have translated it, and it's just like, what the hell was that? And then
yeah.
you go, well, oh no, they did this wrong. Then it's this. Well,
Uh,
this actually makes sense.
There's
So,
some absolute belters in there. There really is. I mean, this, the Old Testament, where they cover the tabernacle in badger skins. That's nonsense. There's no badgers in the Middle East. There never
right.
has been. The apple, the famous. Oh, Eve, bit into an apple. No, she
It's all
didn't.
about
It's not what
knowledge.
not what it says. It
Right.
says fruit. It doesn't tell you what it is.
Right.
Jonah gets thrown up on at Nineveh by from a whale, from the insides of a whale. Well, that's clearly wrong, because Nineveh's about 300 miles inland.
Right.
You know, how the hell did the whale get there? You know, you got one of these kind of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy moments. You know, whale drops out of the sky. So
Teleport.
yeah,
Right.
so there's absolutely loads of bits in there like that. And all that's happened is it's not just a translation, it's a transliteration. They've actually altered it to such a degree to try and make it understandable that in some places it no longer resembles the original language. That's not to say the original's wrong, because actually things like the Dead Sea Scrolls have proved that it's actually right. Most of the early copyists, early copyists copied it correctly. So I don't think there's any errors per se in there. The error, like you say, it's with our understanding and the way we interpret it and the way we translate it, which is a general problem, you know, right across the board. Anyone that decides to set course for the Templars, they're going to hit that as a problem, because
that's what I was going to say. I think there's just a lot of information that it's just not being properly put out there. Like, so I'm going to back up a little bit. The Templars and the head of John the Baptist, the skull of John the Baptist. Is this a thing? Is this just a symbolism, or what is it exactly? Because there's a strong belief that it was found, his head, under the Temple Mount, which is why they revered it.
Well, I'm going to surprise you by saying I'm actually in favour of that one. I think it's going to be a yes from me. There definitely was a head, and the head was definitely venerated, and it survived, believe it or not, past the end of the Templars. The actual intact full head of John the Baptist survived well into the 1400s. So you're talking 150 years after the end of the Templars. And at some point, probably in the 1500s, the skull got broken up. It fragmented. And what we've got at the moment is we've got the top, the actual crown of the skull. That survives in its own reliquary. I believe there's a fragment as well from elsewhere that survives, and a finger bone. And that's all we're left with after the Reformation. The Reformation did untold damage. Well, at least it's something, you know.
It's something. So
they also had things like the head of Saint Euphemia. So they had all kinds of different saints' parts, body parts. They had arms and legs and heads and all sorts of nonsense. All of which have broken up or disappeared, or, you know, they've had the gold and the bits stolen off them over the years, you know, back to this kind of trying to protect stuff from destruction, which wasn't always successful. But I think the trial of the Templars, going back to 1307, when they were accused of worshipping a severed head, the Turin shroud actually folds up. When it's folded up, you're left with this rectangle with the face of Christ in the middle. And I think that was the face, that was the head in inverted commas, that they were worshipping. I think it was the face on the Turin shroud. I literally think it was that simple, which again, we know they had, you know, it's in the Deshani family.
They had everything. So there's a belief also that John the Baptist was supposed to be the head of this movement before he died. The whole Essene movement, the whole Christian, not so much Jesus. Jesus was sort of like the younger cousin who stepped into it.
I think there's a possibility that they went their separate ways. So they both had a really good, strong, solid idea. Yeah, they had a good idea of what they were doing and where they were going with it. But again, you've got to scrap the idea that there was anything called Christianity. That did not exist. So John the Baptist was a desert hermit. That's basically what he chose to be, in the tradition of a whole, you know, hundreds of years of desert hermits, most of whom, funnily enough, inhabited areas of Egypt. So it wasn't uncommon to find people like John, but John was exceptional because he was the voice of heralding the forthcoming Messiah. And then you get Jesus. Jesus comes along, and he basically is Egyptian. That's where he's got his whole outlook and concept and knowledge and information. He's an Egyptian, because when he comes back age 12, he ends up in the temple giving the Pharisees and the scribes a run for the money. He can argue with the best of them, and he's only 12 years old. So clearly he's had a fairly hefty education while he's been in Egypt. And he comes back and he's kind of is the next step. He's going off. The Christians were an offshoot. They were regarded as an offshoot of Hebrew Judaic religion in the 2nd century. A Christian as a label only came about as an insult. You know, it's debatable where in the Roman Empire it was first used. I personally think it was first used here in this country under Constantine's reign. So I think that's where
sense.
I think that's where, you know, Christians, you know, these are followers of Christ. And I think that's when it started over here, but it could be anywhere in the Roman Empire, really. So they didn't exist, you know, they didn't even have a label. They didn't have a label till the, you know, 4th century.
Right.
So, yeah, I think they started 2 different movements, one that was very ascetic and very, you know, out in the desert kind of thing, and the other one, which was a bit more down to earth and, you know, human in a sense, you know. That's where the Templars got their instructions to buy swords and defend themselves from. That's what Jesus said to his disciples before the arrest. He said, go and buy swords, you're going to need them. You know, this is a guy who used to sit and drink with sinners, you know, and prostitutes. And, you know, he actually tells you he drinks because he was having an argument with somebody over the fact that John the Baptist didn't. So it's all this information's in there. He was over 40 years of age because of where he was teaching in the temple. You know, he was about 42-ish when he was crucified, you know, born in 6.5 BC. You know, he's a different character than the one that's popularized. But there's information there that tells you all this. You know, it's all there.
Yeah, it was like a regular guy, sort of.
Yeah, he was a bit more down to earth. Yeah, but he'd learned a thing or two while he was in Egypt. You know, there's not everyday regular guys walk on water or raise people from the dead or, you know, feed 5,000. But you see, that gets
back into the old, excuse me, mystery school knowledge. You know, like he was believed to be a seer. You know, so when would you really raise people from the dead, or was it metaphorically speaking, where you're shedding your old life, your old self, and you're embracing more of a consciousness of it all?
Well, there's a cup that was found. I think I'm right in saying it's 2nd century, and it was found off the coast of Alexandria, and it's thought to be a communion cup because it's like a bowl with 2 handles, you know, and on it actually says Christ the magician. It's in Greek. It says Christ the magician, or possibly Christ the magician, something like magician. It can read both ways. Magician is, anyway, that's it in translation. It's Christ the magician in Greek. So clearly, by the time it got to the disciples wandering around the place and, you know, getting in contact with people, which is sort of getting into 100 AD plus, clearly at that period they were starting to question whether or not he was some kind of magician, you know. That's
when you get into the whole Templar thing, that is all part of the knowledge, and I think that was part of their belief system as well, was just using these other abilities. And it goes back, I mean, like you say, it goes back to ancient Babylon, the ancient Sumerians. If you're getting into the Merovingians, you look at places like Scythia, you know, which actually has connections to Vlad Dracula. Just saying, throw that in there for good measure. But you know,
you'll have to get me in. I'll do a talk on vampires for you if you want. At some point.
I think it was on the list. We're absolutely
it's on the list. Yeah,
I love it. But yeah, so I mean, you know, getting into the Albigensians. Did I say that right?
Albigensians, yeah.
Albigensians, yeah. And I mean, they go back to believe that it goes back to the ancient Sumerians, Anunnaki, that sort of thing as well. So I mean, you're really going back. I think I like how things come back full circle.
Yeah.
And the Templars had a wide belief of it because it was just stuff that they were taught. I mean, Solomon himself, you know, if you can go back that far, you know, of all the information and the treasures and the knowledge that he had.
Well, he's thought to be the greatest magician of all time, isn't he? How on earth anyone can work that out, because he had 1,000 wives, which means he had 1,000 mother-in-laws, you know. It does make you wonder how anyone of that intelligence level could go down that hole. But at the end of the day, yeah, he's quite a character. He's round about, you know, 1,600-ish BC, something like that, you know. And he is, of course, the prototype of everything that follows in that sense.
Right.
But Absolutely. I mean, what we suffer from, and it's a wonderful term, monocultural myopia. And what that means is we suffer from this idea that there was only one or very few of anything in the past, and that
Right.
what there was relates to what is here now.
Right.
That's monocultural myopia, and it just isn't true. Every
Right.
time anybody finds anything out in the Middle East, it's almost like, oh no, it's another sect, it's another religion,
Right.
it's another group of people we didn't know existed, and the Roman Empire is massive. It's enormous. Pretty much everybody you reeled off, Scythians, etc., they're all part of the Roman Empire. They're all joined up in some way. And then you've got everything that went before that, like you say, Greeks, Babylonians,
Right.
whatever, Aztecs, Olmecs, wherever all this information is, nothing exists in a vacuum. You can't just go back and go, the only religion that Britain has ever known was the Druids. It's not true. It's not true of France or Italy or North Africa or Egypt or America.
You don't find a lot on the Druids. I mean, they had a lot of oral history. I think with a lot of the ancient cultures, it was oral history. It's hard to find any written knowledge.
Yeah, it's very, very difficult. We've got a lot of archaeology. There's a lot of archaeological finds, and you can engineer stuff backwards to see what they believed.
Right.
So we know that they were throwing swords into water, and
Right.
a lot of that is related to sun worship and worship of the stars and the heavens.
Right.
But that's common to a lot of the BC period cultures,
Right.
which again, like you say, then carries over. You've got the Magi finding the way to Jesus's birth, which wasn't in a nice little timber manger with little animals and snow, and forget all that. Chances are it was, in a hot spell somewhere near Bethlehem in a desert cave, and we don't even, the thing about the Magi that amazes me is we don't know how many of them there were. There's this, Belshazzar and all the rest of it. There was 3 of them, No, we don't. It doesn't say that in the Bible or anywhere else for that matter. And even if there were only 3 of them, there wouldn't just be 3 of them in their caravan. In a Babylonian caravan of Magi, there can be, 50 or 100 people.
Right.
So there was a lot of people came, and the biggest thing of the lot is that some of them were female.
Right.
So you're dealing with this, medieval idea that there were these, we 3 kings of Orient are, nonsense, absolute rubbish. The Magi that came to a door brought 3 gifts, but that doesn't tell you there were 3 of them. It's nonsense. It's another one of those things. But the Magi, they got there by following a star, because they were stargazers. Now you're into Babylon, you're into Iran and Iraq and all those areas, where these cultures were. And the reason we know he was born in 6.5 BC is that the Chinese recorded the star. It's in their calendar. They actually spotted it, dated it, and that's where it is. So the star the Babylonians were following is the same one the Chinese spotted in 6.5 BC. Ta-da! There you go.
Right. Make it just sound so simple. But I mean, the Templars were, they did believe in the goddess, the sacred feminine.
Now you're going deep. You're right.
Wow.
You're starting to bounce on the bottom of the rabbit hole now. As Gnostics, they appreciated probably most of what we've talked about. So the idea of a god or a goddess, or the idea that God with a capital G embodied both, is most definitely something the Templars were aware of. There's absolutely no doubt about that whatsoever. So they had no trouble with, female knights as well as male knights, with, female ministers as well as male ministers.
The duality of everything.
Yeah, the Catholic Church would be chewing its knuckles off at this point. You know what I mean? That is one of the big differences, between them. It's back to, goodness only knows what documents they found and what teachings they found, and it's back to that Gnosticism that was there, implicit in the Middle East. It's going back to that. They had other things as well. It's said in their ceremony, their initiation ceremony, they quote spat on the cross. Well, that's because the cross is the wrong shape. It's actually the brand, if you like, the branding of the church, Catholic Church, the medieval Catholic Church. Right. You can't actually crucify somebody on a cross that shape.
No,
It's physically and yeah, it's engineering wise, it's impossible. It doesn't even work that way. The only way you can do it is to have two uprights and put a crossbeam on like that.
Ah, there you go. Yeah.
What you do, this is the cross. It's referred to as a stauros in the New Testament.
Right.
And the person would carry that onto two posts the Romans have already put in place, and then just put that on the top, which means, of course, they're nailed out in 4 places because they're nailed out with the legs apart, which is something Da Vinci knew when he did his Vitruvian Man. He was aware of that. If you look at the remains on the Turin shroud, they've been nailed outwards from inside through the ankles. The only surviving ankle bone we have of a crucifixion victim is crucified that way. It's nailed outwards from the inside. You know, I mean, the Romans were doing between 600 and 800 people a day. So they're not going to, you know, glue it, screw it, nail it, dovetail it, rope it, you know, and then try and get something vertically upright that's a single post.
Won't be a thing. Yeah.
No way. No way they're going to bother doing that.
Right.
So it's scaffold. Now, when you know that, which of course the Templars would have known, because they've read the Gospel of John, they've decoded the Gospel of John, they know what the code in there is, so they know what Jesus meant when he said, I am the door, because it's 2 uprights and a crossbeam, etc. They've decoded all of that. So at the end of the day, they knew that the cross was the wrong shape, and to them, it represented this churchianity, this thing they were trying to get away from. So as part of the initiation, they left that behind and they stamped on it. Of course he stamped on it. And Jesus isn't nailed to it anyway, because 3 days later he rose from the dead. So the whole thing is just anathema to them.
Right.
Because they're practicing a different form of early Christianity. And they were Gnostics. They were after the truth, you know, and that's what the truth is. It's also an irony as well. I mentioned this quite a bit, that the church, when they did the final, they burnt Eudepaeons and Godfrey de Saint Omer in a pit. They roasted them in a pit in the River Seine in 1314. It's funny actually, because I think it was Eudepaeons cursed the Pope and King to see them in hell before the end of the year, and both the Pope and King were dead before the end of the year. So
I thought it was Jacques de Molay actually that put that curse.
Oh, was it? Yeah,
de Molay. It was Jacques de Molay.
Yeah, Jacques de Molay. Well, there you go. Well, that's the curse anyway. But but anyway, these where was I going with this? I've lost it. I'm going to backtrack.
Put them in a pit.
Roast them in the rivers. I can't remember where I started. It's gone. Oh dear, it's what getting old does to you. Oh dear. Yeah, I can't remember where I was going with that. It was important.
Maybe it'll come back to you. So.
Oh, I'll remember it in a minute. Yeah. Yes, back to the old religions and the way they were practicing things. And that was it. Got it. I knew it'd come back to me in a matter of hours. The same set of accusations, the exact same set of things that they were tried using. There's a list of them that survived. This is all the things like spitting on the cross and kissing the devil's backside and all this kind of nonsense. It's the same word for word as what the Catholic Church used 300 years later against the witches.
Funny.
So if you study the witches, who again are devil worshipping Gnostics and all this, you study them, you'll find the accusations. They didn't even bother to change a word. They're exactly the same. So in the 1300s, it was the blokes that copped it, and in the 1600s, it was the ladies that copped it. The church went for both sets using the same set of accusations. And the whole thing, this idea of, the Templars worship Baphomet. Baphomet came about in about 1820. It was a guy called Eliphas Levi that did an engraving of this devil god with the horns and the wings and the boobies and all that kind of nonsense. A Baphomet comes from a medieval document that describes what the Templars worshipped in the 1300s, and the word that's mistranslated as Baphomet is actually Muhammad. Because these guys are coming back from the Middle East worshipping Muhammad. They've converted. Half of them coming back have converted to Islam. So there's another reason there for the Catholics to really not like the whole order. And that's something that's like a thread, a strand, if you like, that has been abandoned. It's been left out because it's not politically correct, to talk about, things like that. But over here, we had a king over here. Canute was a king in the early 800s. I think it was about 823. I think he minted a coin over here. And on the reverse of the coin, it says, there is no God but Allah. And that's a Danish Viking British king minting his own coins. And on the back of it, it says, "There is no God but Allah." So the whole idea that, you know, the Islamic world didn't have an impact and didn't influence.
Oh, it sure did.
Yeah, it's nonsense. But these guys are coming back, you know, and they've got an Islamic idea. So it's not only is it Gnostic, not only is it Christian, it's also Islamic.
Yes.
You know, they've merged all this together. You know, I suppose the Cathars were the least of the problems for the Catholics back then, you know.
Right, right. Well, they just believed everything came from within. You know, they didn't need a middleman to teach them. But
that's another thing, because the Templars were all monks and they'd all taken monastic vows and they were in monastic orders and they were all initiates. If you came face to face with a Templar, the Templar was equal to a vicar. Right. So the Templars effectively could run the show exactly the same as any of the Catholic priests.
Exactly. They didn't need anybody telling them what.
Exactly. They had a direct line to God. They had a massive amount of military force, huge amount of money. They owned tons of land. You know, you can kind of see where, you know, churchianity was starting to fall out with them, you know.
I love it. I love it. It's been a fantastic conversation. And I know there's so much more, because I know it's a much bigger rabbit hole. So
I was going to say, don't tell me it's over already.
I know. We're pretty much getting there. One last question pertaining to the Templars. Do you think when they came to, let's say, what we call the New World here, that they brought things with them to hide them?
Well, the biggest question is what things. Two of the things they definitely didn't bring, in my opinion, is, you know, the Grail, the capital T, capital G Grail, which is the cup at the Last Supper. You know, I think that's in Spain, no doubt about that at all. And the other thing I don't think they brought is the Ark of the Covenant, which is, you know, as far as I know, that's in Ethiopia. That's in Axum. But it's very possible that whatever relics they did have, they would have traveled with them. If they're doing long distance, if they're going on ships, you know, even archaeologically, when ships are excavated, when things are brought up from the 14 and 1500s, there are church items and relics found in amongst the treasures. So there's no reason at all why 100 years before they wouldn't have been doing the same thing, you know. So, yes, I would expect to find some pretty amazing things out there on land that is, you know, declared to be Templar. Exactly what you'd find, though,
I think scrolls, more information, stuff that they did not want to be found by the church, for example.
Well, that's the thing. When I said, you know, 1307, when they raided all these Templar preceptories in France, most of the material substance had gone. It wasn't there. So clearly, you know, all the chests containing scrolls, documents, relics, gold, silver, you know, that was all gone. Where it went, that's open to debate, you know. So why not? Why not the New World?
Well, if you're studying things like alchemy, even though the church knew about it, you know, they didn't like stargazers, and they surely did not like alchemists. And if that was part of the information, the knowledge that they were hiding, resurrection, anything that contradicted their stories, you know, their mainstream, this is what the church is, this is who Jesus Christ was, this is how things came to be. Anything that would contradict that would be considered a form of heresy. So you would want to vacate and take all of that with you. I would, personally speaking, right? So
I mean, that whole atmosphere doesn't start to break down till you hit the Renaissance. And the Renaissance is like late 14s, early 15s. You know, you're in that period now. You're slowly crawling into the modern era. So anything before, let's say anything before Columbus and, you know, the 1470s, 1480s, you know, that kind of period. Funnily enough, Columbus landed with a Templar cross on his ships.
Funny that.
You know, funny that, isn't it? Yeah.
His father-in-law was a Grand Master who owned a fleet of ships.
Correct. And had a thing called the Red Chalice, which was rumoured to be one of the items from the Last Supper. So there you go. Another piece of trivia for you. He had the Red Chalice of Marseille. He had. So yes, it would appear that was some continuation of earlier activity, shall we say. So
Right.
you've got the Vikings, you've got the medieval period with the St. Clairs, you've then got the Templars, and then you've got the Columbus era.
Mhm.
And, it's kind of, they're all linked.
Right.
You're looking at a continuous flow there of stuff going back into to the New World.
Da, da, da.
Someone needs to write a book on that as well, don't they?
I know, Mark. Quit
Yes.
goofing around and get writing.
Yeah, dearie me.
Quit slacking around and get yourself writing a book or two. Well, I am thrilled that we did this segment.
At last. Yeah.
People are so fascinated by it. There's new series coming out all the time. There are some that are, on at the moment as we speak. But it's always been one of those things that people seem to be really interested in. So I think that I think we covered a lot of ground, and I know you're coming back, and we're going to be talking again. Let me get the date. Let me get the date. So I could just tell people ahead of time. March 21st.
That's the one. And we're going to do something incredible with the moon.
I think we are. We're going to change the record time, though. That works. Something that works for the two of us. This is good.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll talk about that in a minute. But yes, so it's going to be also very controversial, I'm sure. So, but looking forward to it as always. So going to sign us off, everybody. I hope you enjoyed tonight's segment, because I know I surely did, and you all know it's very near and dear to me. I love the whole topic. So big thank you to Mark Olly for coming on and sharing his knowledge with us. Next,
just in case anyone wants to contact me,
yes,
Facebook. Come and friend me on Facebook. Send me a friend request, and as long as you're a real person, I'll accept you, and you can talk to me on Messenger.
Right.
Yeah. There you go. As you were.
And that's that's pretty much the only place that anybody could find you at. So they can communicate with you there. And I know you post a lot. You have a really big presence on Facebook. So go seek Mark out on Facebook. Okay.
I am on Amazon.
People.
I was going to say I'm on Amazon and I'm on YouTube as well if they want to go and look at material.
Oh well, you should send me the links.
Just do a search. Put where is it? Put my name, which is down here in the bottom corner. Put that in, and I'm sure you'll get 9 books, and you'll get a load of YouTube material.
Well, I will link. I'll go right to the link on Amazon and YouTube. We just put in your name, Mark Olly, and then you have a channel. Okay,
most of it's posted on a site called Drake, Michigan. So if you can find Drake, Michigan, that'll take you straight to most of the material.
All right, hold on.
You should be able to find that. But like I say, if you just
I want to share it. Drake, Michigan life coaching, is that what I'm looking
it'll be that.
Okay,
channel on YouTube.
Okay, I will seek that out, and I will put the links in the show description so people can go click on it and find it. So, okay, that will be done. So, guys, next week, please join us on Wednesday night as Leslie Mitchell Clark comes and joins us again. She is a returning guest. It's been a while. She's going to be discussing different types of alien races. She's a past life and ET contactee hypnotherapist, and she's worked with a lot of people who've encountered different species of extraterrestrials. So she's going to share some of that with us. And Thursday night, something a little bit out of the norm for us. We're going to be having Jack Roth here for the very first time, and he's going to be discussing his book. And this is a really popular topic: Killing Kennedy, exposing the plot, the cover-up, and the consequences. So that's going to be good. People are just fascinated with Kenny for some reason. I'm not really, but I know Amelia is, because she does a lot of missing persons, assisting in finding missing people and profiling. She's been taught how to do profiling with police and things like that. So this is really up the alley of those who love a good mystery, and this one just seems to keep going. So everyone have a great weekend, and we will see you next week, and enjoy the show. Good night.
Good night.